Hi, welcome to the Reader and Writer podcast. He reads,
And she writes.
and we love stories. I'm Anna,
I'm Mike.
and we're your friendly neighborhood nerdy couple. And today we are starting with the basics. We
Yeah.
are talking about what makes a story, because
And
really that kind of sets the groundwork for
our podcast is
podcast
going to be all
and-
about stories. So we wanted to start with
Yes.
what is a story and why do we love them?
Yes, why do we love them? It sets the groundwork for not just this podcast, but really like why we do what we do and what we love.
Yeah.
Is really a big part. So what is a story?
Well, a story is at its most basic level an account of something happening.
Stuff has to happen.
Yeah. Something happened and this is what it was.
Okay.
And usually there's people involved,
Usually.
or at least some sort of a character. We have examples of stories where objects can be characters, like
That's true.
in Disney's Encanto.
The house.
I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
Encanto.
The house is a character.
Casita. Yes.
In Aladdin, there's a rug that's a character.
I can't believe it. I'm losing to a rug.
You know, things can be characters too, but usually a story is usually something happened
Or
to
even,
someone or with someone.
Is this accurate? I'm just thinking of things that aren't necessarily the plot itself. So like the storms in on Roshar, would that count? Because I mean they're an element of the story.
Yeah,
I don't know if they're a character.
I wouldn't call them a character. There's
but
a character that creates them and sends them around the world.
Okay,
but
I think that counts.
We'll get into that in another podcast.
Yes. All right. What is story? So a bit more technical. What is a story? And then why do we love them so much? This is when we get into the really fun stuff that we love, which is the philosophical side of it. Why do we as people love stories? Why do we care so much? Because we care. We care a lot. So, and just before we really get into the nuts and bolts, there will always be exceptions. Yeah. Usually in literary fiction, which is not our jam so much, but there pretty much is always exceptions to whatever we talk about. So I just want to get that out of the way, that off my chest.
Yeah, we're
I'm
speaking.
Sure comments want to get it off their chests.
Please do.
Let us know.
Let us know when we're wrong. Please do.
We love to hear it.
But yeah, we're speaking in generalizations. We're trying to describe. There's this wealth of stories in the human experience, and we're trying to describe like what are things that almost all of them have or encompass.
Yeah.
That make them stories as opposed to just like a weather report. You know.
Yeah. Like. Yeah. There you go. So account of something happening, and those things can be real life. So like ahistorical. When you write it, it's ahistorical. When you say it out loud, it sounds really weird.
Yeah. Ahistorical.
I
apologize for the terrible accent.
Well, or it can be made up life, fake life, as there's an actor who calls it that. I think it's Tom Hanks. I think he says the fake life is what he calls his movies. He's acting in fake life. I'm like, I like that a lot. And someone thought happened is another option. Interpretation. Sometimes you get like people's diaries are published, and that's telling a story a lot of times, and it's their interpretation of events, which can sometimes become a completely different thing than reality. Like it's kind of this in-between space. And even like I think dreams would fall into that, or imaginations, or even if you want to get into like mental health things of people understanding things as not what actually happened, or as seeing things that maybe other people don't see, or whatever.
Well, and I think there's also a level of we interpret things that happen to us through a filter, and
we can't not interpret.
Right. And so, you could ask two people who saw the same thing happen, and you may get two very different ideas of what actually happened by listening to their stories.
Yeah. And both are, I think it's important to say that both are valid.
Yeah.
Because they're from two different people. And I think you have to take those subjectively.
Yeah.
You can't take them objectively because they're people. And then the third is things that are completely fiction and completely made up, which honestly are sometimes the most fun and are really fun because of the separation.
Many of them around us.
Many of them around us. Our friends are with us today.
Yes.
Yeah, the complete fiction. And the best part about fiction is that it can talk about the real life stuff and interpretation, but it has that separation so you can really think about it without it being too risky or too dangerous.
And that's one of the things I love in fiction is when you have a story, and because you're in a fictional story, the stakes are lower than they are in real life, but you have a chance to address topics that are really heavy and weighty,
or just really
and
hard.
just kind of have that discussion with your audience or with the author.
Yeah, or even like I've got some really good examples that we won't touch on today, but they'll be in upcoming. All right. And then plot. What's really important, really important in telling these things, we have three components that all stories generally must have. And I say that not because if you don't have one of these things, you don't have a story, but if one of these things is missing or lacking, you come away from that story being like, that wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And even if you can't nail what it is, it's one of these things in all likelihood. And that's plot, character, and theme. And those three things, if they are well-rounded and really well done, you have a really good story. And when one of those is missing, like I said, you can almost feel it. If you can't articulate it, you're kind of just like something's missing. Something fell flat or something was just bleh.
Yeah. If you have a character and a theme, but you don't have what they're doing or what happened, like that's just a person.
Yeah.
And that's just like their mood, maybe.
Yeah, it's very unsatisfying.
If you have a plot and a theme, but there's nobody around, then it just feels empty.
Or even underdeveloped characters, which I'm not going to give examples right now because that will derail us completely.
Yeah, we don't need to go. We don't need to go deep into the weeds on this.
Not yet.
Yeah, you really need to have those three elements for something to really feel like a story.
I think that's important to know as someone consuming stories, a reader, a watcher of content or whatever, but also of writing. If you're writing stories, hi, nice to meet you. Plot, character, and theme are kind of the big three.
Yeah.
What is a plot?
Yeah.
Let's break it down.
The plot is, at its simplest level, what happened.
What happened.
The
order.
We talked about you need a character and a theme. The plot is what is happening in the story. So there are a lot of different elements of that.
Yes.
One that we see in many, many stories is conflict.
Yeah.
And that could be like the driving force of the story. It could be a story of good versus evil. We have Lord of the Rings right here, where you have this conflict between good and evil. Frodo trying to take the ring to Mordor.
But conflict can also, conflict can be major like that, but can also just be kind of like obstacles that they're overcoming. It's conflict, to narrow down to the most basic, because that's what we're doing today, is the most simple, most basic. It's conflict is things that prevent the characters from getting what they want or what they are trying to achieve. And the plot is the events unfolding because of that. So you could argue you don't have a plot if you don't have conflict.
Yeah.
Or you have a bad plot because there's no conflict. But other things that happen to create plot and to create conflict and events happening is also conversations, because you have a lot of stories and movies. I mean, the classic example is always like Pride and Prejudice or Jane Austen movie. There's no explosions. There's no Dark Lord ruling over.
There's no literal explosions.
There's no just literary ones. It's mostly conversations or people running away from their fiancés. It's fine. There's conversations is a big part of conflict. It's relationships, and that's part of it's leaning into. That's where plot and character kind of intersect. Conflict and events is kind of where theme intersects with plot more often. Conversations do too. But those are also part of the plot, is people interacting and progress happening through relationships. Because that's also, I think, our next thing is to say that what plot is not just the events happening, but progress is happening. It's not just like a to-do list, like event, but you are moving with a character through, there's progression, tension, suspense.
It's connected.
Yes.
The scenes and events flow into each other and impact each other.
There's a drive and a momentum going through.
In a good story, like if a character breaks his arm is going to be broken in scenes that take place following the scene where that happened.
It's continuity.
Continuity is super important.
And when you get into the progress and tension of the plot progressing and things like that, that's where you get tension of like, why are we doing this? Of the side quests of just like, where did the plot go? I don't know what this has to do with it. And that is when you're losing your plot element. If you're writing a story and you have lost the plot, it's probably because you've gone on a side quest and you're dealing with the chickens instead of Ganondorf. Like, you gotta get back on track, friend. Like, I know it's interesting, but come on.
Yeah.
And this gets into world building, which is huge in all of our favorite things.
And our favorite genres.
It's a big part of it. Let's get into the next element, which is character.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of starting to roll into that is character.
Yeah. So we've talked about the plot, which is like what is happening, and the character is
who's doing it.
What is this thing happening to? And there are a lot of different types of characters that can have different roles within a story.
Right. Because we obviously will have a main character or protagonist or hero. Those are different and the same all at the same time.
Yeah, a lot of it is going to depend on the type of story. So this does tie into theme a little bit.
It does. Theme and genre and all those kinds of.
Yeah. But the main character in a sitcom is going to be playing a different role within the story than the main character in epic fantasy.
It's true. The main character in a sitcom may not be doing a whole lot of protagging. Things may be happening to them, but ultimately they may not decide to do anything about it until the third act. And that's okay, because it's a sitcom. If that happens in your epic fantasy or your sci-fi, like, you're going to have some really upset readers and fans. Like, they're going to be like, why do we care what this person is doing? Because they aren't protagonist. They're not being a protagonist.
Yeah, because that genre demands a strong main character.
They need to do the thing.
Or a subversion of the trope of the strong main character, which can be interesting, but we don't need to go into all of that.
We will save
that could be a whole podcast episode on its own.
It probably will be. And then, very importantly, we'll have side characters. Side characters is where you can really get into theme with a side character. I think a really, really great example, and is in Lord of the Rings, classic example, is Sam. Sam is a side character, but he's also super, super important. He reminds Frodo the point. He reminds the reader of the point of this whole big, epic quest. And when Frodo gets all depressed and everything, Sam is there to remind him why we're doing this. And that's really the theme, with Tolkien being a veteran of World War I, and just that was always his question: is what's the purpose? Why is there pain and suffering, and why does the world exist the way it does? And he gives us Sam. And so the side characters in a story typically are the ones who kind of help fill it out, give us stakes, they give us theme, they world build a lot. They also typically help with character development. And a lot of times our main character won't do what they need to do without a side character giving him the motivation. Not by dying.
No fridging.
No fridging.
Fridging's not allowed.
Not allowed. Though that does happen. But it could be, the mentor giving the little pep talk, or the best friend being like, let's do it together, or whatever. That's usually kind of the role the side characters play. Not all the time, but sometimes. And then we have our favorite people, the villains and the antagonists. They're not always outright villainous, but the antagonist, who is basically just whoever is opposed to the protagonist.
Yeah. And an important point is you can have stories where you have a protagonist and an antagonist, and they're both good guys. They're not necessarily bad guys.
Yeah.
Like
we're watching that now with X-Men. Who's right? That's X-Men.
Yeah.
That's X-Men 101 is depends who you ask.
Yeah. But I was thinking Captain America Civil War.
Ooh, Civil War is a great example.
Is Tony Stark a bad guy? I mean, maybe he was in his younger days when he was an arms dealer.
Well,
but at this point he's not. But neither is Steve Rogers, and yet the conflict is mainly between
the two of them. And even and then you get into things of like
it can get really complicated.
He may be right, but he's going about it the wrong way, and that's when you get guys like Thanos. Like maybe he's right, but this is not the way to go about this, dude. Like, character. Another part of character that's just really, really important is their relationships, and this is what makes us love characters and makes them matter to us is their relationships. There is no I have a little bit of a soapbox. Here we go. I'm coming up on the soapbox. There is no point of a character if they don't have any relationships. There needs to be relationship with that character and somebody else. I'm sticking with my Lord of the Rings examples today, apparently. So Tom Bombadil is a side character who does not matter to the quest, but we love him because he's weird and he has relationships. He has his wife, and at the end of the book, Gandalf goes to see him, which means Gandalf knows him, which makes him interesting. So, you could still argue there's no point to Tom Bombadil, but don't say that to me because you are wrong. But the point of having a character is that they are integrated into this world. There's I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, or we're gonna lose it. We're gonna lose it. Okay, different types of relationships. We've got classic like romances, but we also have like bromance. We've got the guys again, Lord of the Rings. It's an entire group of bromance. They're all together doing the thing.
An example I would think of is like the friendship between the three boys in the Wheel of Time.
Yes.
You have Rand, Matt, and Perrin, who are best friends, and they often go their separate ways throughout the story. But every time they come back together, there's a dose of reality. I think of like friends that I had growing up who I don't see for a long time. Then when we come together, you can just pick up right where you left off.
There's a richness,
and when you can relate to stories like that, that's one of the reasons that we love them.
It's excellent. And I didn't mean to, and I don't mean to, we really love a good friendship in a story. Romance it's fine. There's nothing wrong with a good romance. Can be good. It can be good. We like the friendship tropes better. And then obviously, those kinds of things are great. Another element of character, we have ensembles. Like Lord of the Rings, Guardians of the Galaxy. The Wheel of Time has a pretty good ensemble as well. The Mistborn series also got quite the ensemble for the first Mistborn trilogy. I haven't read the Era 2.
We're working on that.
We're working on it. We're getting there. So ensemble is another element of character, and ensemble is really interesting because you're using a group of characters to be your main character a lot of the times. I think particularly a really good example is Guardians of the Galaxy. Like any of those guys by themselves is not going to give you a whole movie. Like they're going to be all that interesting, but they make a really interesting group, and we love seeing them work together. Like it's the best.
Or maybe to switch genres a little bit, you think of one of the most popular shows of all time is Friends.
Oh, true.
Right? Yeah. And that's just a total ensemble.
Ensemble.
If you ask 5 different fans of that show who the main character is, you might get 5 different answers.
It's true. Yeah, that's a really good example. Another big part of character is we've kind of talked about it a little bit already, is character development or their character arc. And there are typically 3-ish different kinds of arcs. There's a positive arc where we have growth, or from either they are not very good at something and become good at something, or they're not very nice, or can't get along with anybody, or they're really awkward or whatever, and then they get good at whatever that is. There's an upward arc. And then there's a flat arc, which can be really interesting characters who don't really change. They just kind of do what they do. And we really enjoy watching them be really good at whatever it is. Flat arcs can be really interesting characters, even though nobody likes the term flat, neutral. And then there's negative arcs, which is the downward spiral. Typically, like you think of like the tragic heroes, or a villain origin story is a negative arc. And all of those arcs and character development comes from their motivation. And their motivations can change over a story, but it's the motivation that drives the character, and the motivation gets into one of our other elements of story, which is theme. And so basically the theme plays into what the motivation is, and that makes the character do the thing, which is plot, and that's how all three of them work together. So if you have writer friends, if you are struggling with your plot, or you're kind of like, oh, what is this story about? I don't know, maybe I need to work on my theme or whatever. It might be your character motivation, that it's lacking substance. It's lacking clarity, even. Like maybe you know what the character motivation is, or maybe even your character may have even said it, but it's just not clear. I think two really obvious examples of this is Jane Foster in Love and Thunder. We have no idea what her motivations are. We don't get any dialogue from her, really. We don't get kind of a look into her mind. We get kind of little side conversations. She does a lot of cool stuff, but we don't get a full like, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then I think also in my favorite MCU TV series, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We don't know why anybody's doing anything except for, darn, I always forget his name. The he's not a villain. What is his name? John.
Fake Captain America.
Fake Captain America. Fake Captain. What's his name? Agent. U.S. Agent. That's a superhero name. Later. Anyways, U.S. Agent. I think his name is John something. Anyways, that's not the point. We know his motivation. His motivation is super clear. We know why he does what he does, which is why every scene he is in is the most interesting scene. It's really tense in the entire series. We don't know why anybody else is doing anything.
I would argue about that.
We can have an argument about that later. So, but maybe there was a clear, maybe it was unclear. How about that? We'll settle for that for today. All right. So they need a why. Our characters need a why, and that's really a big part of why they do what they do. And yes, and that plays into theme. So what is theme?
Yeah, theme is the mood or the tone of the story. Is this something that's happy? Is it, to use the ancient terms, a comedy or a tragedy?
Yes.
Do we have a happy story or a sad story? Is it light and bright, or is it dark? Is it funny, or is it sad?
Yeah, are we in the Discworld series or the Cosmere? Are we in, are we in Metropolis or Gotham? Like, what's going on? And I think theme is difficult because we all were in English class, and our English teacher told us the theme is like redemption, or all of these really big heady things, and that's fine. That can be part of it.
Yeah, those are elements of the theme for sure.
For sure. And I think what's more helpful in reading literature or movies or books, in basically, and I think in being like, I like this kind of thing, it's more helpful to have kind of a mood or tone of a story to be like your guiding principle than like, I like stories about parenthood. I like stories about whatever, processing racism, issues or whatever, which is fine, but it's gonna vary very wildly. So it's, I think, using theme and mood or tone together is, I think, more helpful than the traditional definition of theme. I think also part of this is the meta story that they're telling. I think of like the meta story of like, every good kid show is teamwork and friendship. Like Ninjago, that our kids love, it's teamwork and friendship every single time. Every time. Ice Age, teamwork and friendship. Like, just, it's just, that's the theme. That is what wins the day every time. And if that's your theme, you're going to have a lighter story.
Yeah. But then you look at something like Finding Nemo, where the themes are dealing with grief and parenthood.
Yeah.
And it's a much heavier tone.
It is. It is. It's
and
not the same as Ice Age.
Yeah, even though it's animated and you could say it's a kids movie,
yeah,
there's a lot of I don't want to say adult themes. That sounds weird, but there's a lot of maybe more mature themes in there that uh, grown-ups can pick up on and
which is
can
what
really
makes a good
relate to.
Another example of like meta stories, like The Matrix. That's kind of a pretty obvious one. It's the herd mentality. Don't be a follower. Like, question things is okay, and that those kinds of the meta story that that is telling, and that gives you a very different mood. Like, that's just just the nature of the fact that you need to question everything about your reality. That's going to just automatically give your tone a lot darker, grittier feel. And that's what you get in The Matrix. Like, it's not a happy movie, and that's okay.
Theme, especially in the first Matrix movie, is something that's handled really, really well through their visualization.
Yes.
When you're inside the Matrix, everything is kind of bland and
brutalist,
almost depressing. It's there's not bright colors. There's everything just kind of is meant to keep you down and keep your head down and be on the right track. And then when they finally break out into the real world, sorry, spoilers, movie's been out for 25 years, I think that's fair.
It's allowed.
When Neo finally gets out into the real world, everything is dark and terrifying because of just the state of the planet and
which
humanity.
is really interesting because it's not like inside the Matrix was happy.
No, yeah.
So it's not like a complete, 180. It's not just like, oh, what is happening? I thought it was this complete other thing. And it's like, no, it was leaking into it the entire time. The tone is straight through, and there's most stories are like that.
Yeah.
And then I think something that's a little bit more complicated, is like Harry Potter's theme is love, which means it's messy.
Yeah.
It's messy. We've got really good things. We've got the Weasleys, and it's a beautiful story with the family, and just, it's wonderful. And then we have all of the people who have died, like, just or unalive, been, it's just, it's complicated and it's messy, and it's not afraid to be so, which is kind of great in a kids book series.
Yeah.
I'll put that in very loose air quotes. Okay. And theme is also part of genre. It's, how did you describe it? I'm gonna let you describe it, because if I describe this, I'm gonna ruin it.
Yeah, the way I describe that is, if genre is the x-axis of a story, then theme is the y-axis.
Yeah,
and so they intersect, and there's different different ways that you could approach the same genre by varying the theme. You can have fantasy that's very bright and happy and presents like an idealistic version of the world, or you can have fantasy that's very dark and oppressive, and really shows you the depths of humanity. You think like Narnia is very
it's a bit lighter,
it's very positive and very lighter, whereas like Lord of the Rings has a much darker tone. And that's interesting, and it's really interesting because they're both telling the story of good versus evil.
They are very much
and good overcoming evil, but they're coming at it from a different angle with a different theme that really presents a contrast in the story.
Yeah, that's really good. Two other elements we really want to touch on real quick. We kind of touched on genre. Genre is a very big part of stories and very big part of storytelling. However, genre is the box in which your story fits. Generally speaking, there are lots of boxes, and the boxes like to mix and overflow and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but oftentimes they're defined by someone other than the author and the audience.
And sometimes genre comes after you've written the story.
Yeah, I think of like one example of this is YA. YA is totally fake. It's just the publisher says, I think we should market this to a teenage audience instead of an adult audience.
Yeah, that's really
because
true.
Of
Genre can be just marketing, and that's interesting. And but there's also definitely genres that like people are like, oh, I like this genre, or I don't like this genre. For example, I am not a fan of rom-coms. They're just not my thing. I like an action flick. And those are genres. Those are two very distinct.
Yeah.
There's also overlap. I see you, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. There is overlap, but there's still the distinct genres, and those are helpful for categorizing and kind of giving you. They're helpful. They're not required.
Yeah.
But I think we are going to talk about this, later on. Is there are certain things that genres expect of their stories.
That's absolutely true.
And that is important, is particularly if you are writing a story, to be aware of. You need these certain things in order to label your story a certain genre.
Yeah. For example, a fan of science fiction is going to have a different set of expectations when they're picking up a science fiction book than a fan of family comedy is going to have when they're picking up a family comedy book.
Yes.
And so, as a reader, you're bringing these expectations to the table. And as an author, part of your duty, I don't want to say duty because it's weird to say duty in relation to art, but if you want to satisfy your audience, you need to try to meet those expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't meet those expectations, you've missed. I don't want to say you've failed, but you've missed.
Yeah. Unless you're intentionally subverting them, again, which we've kind of touched on.
Yeah, but that's making a very different statement than trying to shoot your shot and missing.
Yeah.
There's very different. There's a difference between a kid with a basketball and missing, or a kid grabbing the basketball and chucking it this way, to be funny to his friends. Like that's the difference between subverting and just not quite getting there. So that's genre.
Yeah, maybe an example. If you're writing a science fiction story and you don't have an explanation for any of the technology, and you don't have to describe it on page necessarily.
It doesn't even have to be
But if it's just kind of in the background and no one even cares about it, that's probably going to disappoint some people.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
maybe
if your spaceship crashes in the first act and it becomes a survival story,
that's a very different thing.
That could be a very interesting thing for people to read.
Yeah, and that's fine. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with your story necessarily. It just means you're telling a different story. And that's fine. But you may just need a pivot. And then another big thing, which is a little bit less discussion oriented, is setting. Setting is huge. I'm just going to say there's setting that is genre related. And I'm going to touch on one just as an example. And that's like my favorite thing is zombies. I would include zombies and like type of thing in your genre. This is kind of where setting and genre bleed together. If you haven't noticed yet, a lot of these things touch each other. They're all mixing and matching. They don't fit in their perfect bento box, squares. They all bleeding into each other. It's more like a Thanksgiving plate where they all kind of touch. It's not well organized.
It's not a cafeteria tray.
It's not a cafeteria tray. So, and setting is like that. And there are certain settings that, like, if you're writing a fantasy, your setting better be pretty fantastical. And if it's something more of like an urban fantasy, that better be in your setting too, like setting is a big part of setting up the plots, the characters, what kind of characters we can expect, what kind of genres we're dealing with, and all those kinds of things. Setting is really kind of the unsung hero sometimes of stories.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of the technical side of what is a story, what makes a story.
And if we've missed anything that you think is vitally important, let us know in the comments.
Please let us know. Clearly, we like talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do let us know. Now, to get into our favorite part. Why why stories? Why do we care so very much? And we like love stories. I mean, that's why we have books and movies. And even, okay, because I'm a history nerd also, even before we had books and movies, what if people have been telling stories to each other since we could talk? I mean, we have kids, and the first thing they start doing when they can string words together is tell you a story of what they did or what they're doing. They play pretend. Like, it's just in our DNA.
It really is. You know, you can think back to like they had theaters in ancient Greece, where they would have plays, or even going all the way back like to early cave art when people were still figuring out like what even is technology.
What I mean. Yeah, that's what cave art is.
It's a story.
It's a story, and maybe
something that someone did.
Yeah, of events and people and place and theme, which is generally hunting related. But it's they're telling their story, how they can. And I'm sure, like, I can just imagine like those cave paintings, like as they finished it, and then they gather everyone around and they're telling the story, pointing out each one. I did this one, and here is us chasing, that scene in Ice Age where they're illustrating, and they're just like being tagged with the antelope with their teeth. Yeah.
So why do we care so much? I think it's a big part of it. This is not the only part of it, but a big part of it is that we can relate to stories.
Yes.
Our lives are stories. We have a beginning, we have a middle. We're all going to approach an end one day, and stories encapsulate that in a way that we can relate to. Maybe in a way that gives us some hope, or that can help us get through a hard time. And that's, at its core, I think we feel connected to stories in a way that we may not to other forms of art.
I think so. And I think sometimes when life doesn't make sense, stories can help us make sense. I think, if I may share a bit of personal story with that. When I went through my miscarriage, I was listening to the Harry Potter series to kind of distract myself. And the day I lost the pregnancy was the day I listened to Harry processing losing Sirius Black. And it was so helpful for me to be reading somebody processing grief while I was processing grief, in a way that took the weight of me trying to process it and giving me the words that were really hard for me to come up with. And stories are magical like that. They just are. Stories are also how we learn. I mean, what I wrote down is, you remember stories your grandma told you more than you remember any math class. That's that is like, like, you remember stories. You don't remember math problems. I don't. My kids quiz me on math problems all the time, and I'm just like, I don't know.
You have to yell for dad from across the house.
It's not my strength. But also, I'm thinking, again, I like to think historically. Think of folk tales, myths, legends are all stories that were told to teach. To teach about true things, like true characters, or to teach morals, or at least, if not morals, then like, don't go into the woods because the crazy witch might eat you, or whatever. They're meant to be illustrative and integrated into our world, and to help us remember things. That's often why things are written down for religious reasons. The Bible is a book full of stories. So is the I'm going to say it wrong. Quran. I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. But other religions too. I am not going to list through the books of religious texts because I will miss them. But they're stories and they're written down to teach. That's the point. Another like proof that we are wired for stories. That's every ad campaign. Every ad.
Yeah.
Every single one is a story. And if you don't believe me, just go watch them. Like I'm sure one will play. You're on YouTube. It's gonna work. Or the internet somewhere. There's ads playing all the time. And they work. That's why they use them. That's why advertisers use them, is because they work. They tell you a story and then you're like, I want that. I want to do that. And then people buy stuff. Like stories work.
You know, the one that pops up in my head is this like really cheesy 90s Mentos commercial.
Oh no.
They've got like this like catchy song that's playing, and this guy is like in the mall and he sees this girl that's really fine. And so he goes and he grabs some Mentos and he's like going through this like journey through the mall to get to the girl, and then he pops the Mentos right before he gets to her so he can go in for a kiss. And
it's my God.
It's like unbelievably cheesy and ridiculous, but it's a story. It sold mints.
It did. It worked.
So
it worked.
Let me know if you remember that commercial.
I don't remember that commercial. It's great. Okay. I think another example, I think the most prominent example that I can think of just proof that stories work and that we love stories, is the phenomena of fandom. We clearly identify with that. Phantom. Oh no.
Phantom Menace.
Yeah. Okay. That's the fandom, and we're not going to deep dive into this, but people identify with their fandoms. People are, I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm a Star Trek fan.
I'm a Trekkie.
There you go, Trekkie. Okay, I'm sorry.
Did it wrong. I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt. I'm sorry.
We didn't have enough merch or space for all of our merch. But yeah, fandom is a huge phenomena. And through our fandoms and through our stories that we love, that we are fans of, we see people succeed. We love to see people succeed. That's why we have heroes. Heroes succeed. They do the fun thing. I was mentioning the other day, I realized Toy Story, Woody's not the hero of Toy Story. Buzz is, because he does all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
Woody just complains the whole time, and he figures it out, and he's fine. We love him. But, we love to see the heroes win. We love to see Buzz fly. It's the best. It's the stand up and cheer. We love happy endings because real life is hard.
Yeah.
And we don't always get happy endings in real life because we often don't live long enough to see them happen. And people mess up, and that's just an unfortunate thing in life. But in stories, we get our happy endings. And sometimes we as fans get really upset if we don't get the happy ending we wanted. So, we won't go into that very much. But like, I wrote down some happy endings that people just love to talk about. I think of like Shawshank Redemption, which is not my favorite movie, but the redemption story of it is so, so powerful. Forrest Gump has a beautiful story. Rudy, the come from behind underdog type story. Ocean's 11, we love to just see those guys do their thing and just win. Like, they're not nice people, but we love to see them win. We also, in stories, we like to see people fail. Like we really do like to see a descent into madness or a villain. Everyone loves a villain origin story. Like, I mean, there've been so many recent reboots and movies of villain origin stories. Like, we need a break. But also, there's a reason why we keep doing it, because we love to see it.
And I think, seeing failure portrayed in stories is a way that helps us cope with our own failures.
Yeah. At least I don't have as bad as that guy.
Yeah. or you see someone fail, but then you see them like progress through that failure and overcome it, and you're like, okay, you know what? Maybe something bad has happened to me, but it's not the end of the day.
Yeah.
I can pick it up and we can move forward, and we can still find good things after a failure.
It's true. And stories give us that degree of separation of being able to process. Like I shared with Harry Potter and my personal experience, is just it's just enough of separation of just like, I can process this because I'm not going through the ringer quite. Um, or if you are, it can be helpful. And we just love that, and we identify with it, and it's just it touches our hearts is what it does. Is it really digs deep into our souls and our hearts, and it gets to us. And this is, I think, my favorite thing about stories is it lets you ask hard questions, risk like free and safely. Like you can deal with some really hard subjects and topics and things you're working through in a safe way, or much safer because you're not the one doing it. The characters are, you know. So you can work through like really hard things. I'm reaching for examples, but I think we can all think of examples, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's something really wonderful that stories give us.
Yeah. And I think, maybe we don't need specific examples for that because that's going to be different for every person.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
know.
Very, very
But
true.
reading stories or watching movies related to struggles that you're walking through can be a really good way to keep your head level and
It's
be
just
able
powerful.
to
Or just
move
have a
through
good
your life.
cry.
Yeah.
Honestly. It's really good. All right. And not to end on a sour note, let's have a moment of story from our week. Would you share one and I'll share one? I'll share one first. I'll share one first so you can think about it. I'm totally springing this on him. I didn't talk to him about this before ahead. I thought about it and then I was like, oh, I never shared it with you. So we're winging this, and he hates winging things. It's great. So moment of story I'll share is I've been reading Harry Potter aloud to our kids, and we're not going to read the whole series currently. We're reading book 3. I think that's probably as far as we can make it. Our oldest is only 8. But we just read the chapter about Aunt Marge, and I warned them ahead of time because they were like, "Oh, who's Aunt Marge?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Uncle Vernon's sister." And they went, "Oh no!" So, yeah, she's terrible. And I told them, I'm like, I hate her more than I hate Voldemort. She doesn't kill people like he does. Like he takes out a lot of people, and that's not good. And she doesn't do that. But I hate her more. Like she's terrible. And so they were like, oh, well, read the chapter, Mom. She can't be that bad. And at the end of the chapter, our son goes, wow, she's awful. Like he was just like, oh my gosh. Like, it's my story from the week. Do you have a story from the week?
Yeah, I guess one story, and this is on a very simple level. We have a 1-year-old who loves bringing a book to someone for them to read.
She loves it so much.
And his favorite books right now are The Little Blue Truck. If you're a parent out there and you don't have these books and you have a little boy, get him these books.
Get them these books.
They're fantastic.
Or at Sam's Club.
But he just brought one of them to me the other day and just held it up and just, picking it up and reading it to him. He was just as happy as a clam.
So happy.
And,
books are powerful.
Yeah. And, I don't know how much of that he even understands.
He understands truck.
Yeah, but he knows there's a truck and it goes through the pages and then he gets to wave goodbye to it at the end.
Yep.
And
that's all he needs.
To me, that's just one of the powers of stories is how it resonates with us from such a young age.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right.
So
this has been
episode 1 of our podcast. We got to come up with a name for our podcast.
We do. It is currently the He Reads, She Writes podcast.
Yeah. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching our first podcast episode. Check out the other videos on our channel. And if you like our content, you like us or don't like us, give us a thumbs up or thumbs down on the video and subscribe to the channel.
Soon. We have lots
to see future content. We have a lot of ideas.
So many ideas.
More videos that we can make. Next
week we're talking X-Men. Yeah. Because it's gonna finish up and we're gonna talk X-Men. So that's next week. See you then.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.